keep going. We'll split this up as we go.
Hmm.
Just
Yeah.
keep it into small enough chunks that it's digestible, right?
Yeah, 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 for sure, for sure.
So
Okay.
keep going, Rob. What else did you want to talk about today?
Yeah, so what I do, let's go into like I felt like there's a lot of questions that I've always kind of had on
Hmm.
my mind, and I think and Mark is um a rare breed of wellness um operative professional or whatever you want to call it
Sure.
because he's clearly thinking outside the box and just not accepting the status quo for a lot of what we know to be true, which is not necessarily factual. And so I just wanted to run through a few things that I've always kind of questioned and like just to get your opinion on, because I know there's a lot of you've done, spent a lot of time doing research and really breaking down like the who, what, and why
Hmm.
of how the certain influence and decisions that have been made that affects our education today as well. Because like
Hmm.
even like if I because I do have some Instagram following, and then like, when I go on there, I know obviously Instagram is awash with everybody's a fitness influencer and everyone's referencing the latest study for this, or if you um, freeze your bread before you
Hmm.
toast it, it's now insulin resistant, and everybody wants to be creating content just for the clicks, and it becomes overly confusing because it's hard to identify who is purely in it for actual real information and who's just there to get views and makes their money through product placement and sponsored
Hmm.
ads and things like that.
Certainly.
So, I just want what I'm just going to just pull up my questions here.
Sure.
Um, one second. Okay, so we might need to go back and forth as we
Ah,
where are
we've
we?
got all kinds of time, and I can break this up into multiple
Yeah.
sessions as we need to. And and by the way, folks, this is probably not going to be the last time you see Rob on my channel.
Mhm.
And Rob will get these videos, and I don't know he'll do what he wants with them. But yeah, I like Rob a lot, and I want you guys to really understand what he's doing and to help support him. So
Yeah.
let's keep going. That's my
Mhm.
plug for you, Rob. I'm
Yeah,
doing.
thank you. Okay, so a lot of my questions kind of arise from our ancestral past
Hmm.
and thinking, before the agricultural revolution and diets, we did sort of having more grains and planted food as part of our diet. But when we were still very much foraging bands in that kind of time period, and obviously meat was the dominant food source. So no, I tried carnivore for a couple of weeks now. I'm already a relatively lean guy, and I dropped like 5 pounds
Hmm.
pretty easily. Okay, I mean I was quite active. We did some hikes and things like this.
Good.
But so my question is, in that time, how did humans avoid getting too skinny? Because like if we're just eating meat, and obviously we're spending, no, we're like our method of hunting is just
Hmm.
running after animals for you know 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers at a time. It's some serious energy requirements. Like what did we have in our diet that counteracted, that kind of replaced like the fuel burn? Because obviously, if we're burning ketones, we're running off body fat. But what, like, do you think we would consuming enough fruit in the summer to sustain the body fat requirements like throughout the whole year?
Okay. First of all, the whole concept that we had to eat fruits and stuff to get body fat is probably incorrect. If there were fruits available, and if you think about Paleolithic man, um, especially during the ice ages, there probably wasn't a whole lot of fruit available to them, right? And
Hmm.
if you look at current day groups like the Inuit, who are
Hmm.
still deep in the Arctic, right? They don't eat any fruits whatsoever because there's nothing grows out there, right? It's almost
Hmm.
perpetual
Hmm.
permafrost, so that they can't grow anything. Or somebody who has access to stuff, but they refuse to eat it, are like the Maasai in Africa, who
Hmm.
really only eat beef, milk, and the blood that they mix into stuff from their cattle, right? They
Hmm. Hmm.
disdain anything plant oriented as a rule. And
Hmm.
what's interesting is this is not genetic, because there's another tribe right next to the Maasai that is essentially vegetarian. I can't remember their name
Hmm.
off the top of my head. I could look them up, but it's
Hmm.
not worth doing that right now. Uh, and the Maasai and these tribes interact, and they intermarry, and they spread. And when somebody marries into the Maasai, they become pure carnivore,
Hmm.
and they get lean real quick.
Mm.
And when a Maasai typically it's women who intermarry. When a Maasai woman marries into the other tribe, well, guess what? They start eating grains and rice and
Mhm,
sweet potatoes, and they put on the weight real quick.
mhm,
So
mhm,
it's
mhm,
not genetic. It is definitely the way you're eating. And there are
mhm,
other examples, but those are just two quick ones. So uh, the first question is, how can you be too thin? And if you look at the Maasai, what happens with them is that they are extremely tall compared to
mhm,
average people all around the world.
mhm,
And they're very lean and they're very strong, right? So obviously not eating any vegetable matter of any kind for the most part doesn't
mhm,
hurt them. And they do this throughout
mhm,
the year. Uh, and then if you look at Paleolithic man, and we do the nitrogen um, studies on their bones, we find there's almost no trace of anything other than the nitrogen you'd expect from protein and from fat. So
mhm,
the archaeological evidence points that they were essentially only eating fat. In fact, uh, what we like to talk about is that um, the standard classifications most people are used to, which is herbivore, omnivore, and carnivore, are far too simple. Okay,
mhm,
uh, herbivore is something that eats mostly only plant foods, and the most classic examples, of course, are cows, right? Which are supposed to only eat grass, uh, and then you can think of like bison and stuff, and they don't get any sugar from that diet, yet they're very large animals with a
mhm,
lot of body fat on them, and that comes from the fact that what happens is in their bodies they have the bovines, right? The cows, the bisons and stuff. They have an extremely large multi-compartment stomach
mhm,
where they do all of the fermentation, and there's almost no acid in their stomach. I don't know if you've seen. There are shows. I love watching these science shows where they actually cut a hole in the side of the cow so they can actually see what's going on in their stomach, and the scientists and the farmers are putting their hand in there and playing around inside their stomach. There's no
mhm,
acid in
mhm,
there, right?
mm.
Unlike
I mean,
a carnivore's stomach.
yeah. I mean, like the most extreme example would be like a vulture, because like their stomach's extremely acidic
Oh,
because they
it
can
has to be.
basically like devour, rancid meat essentially.
Exactly. Absolutely correct. So these guys uh, have no way of actually getting nutrition from
Hmm.
fat and proteins, right?
Hmm.
The bacteria in their stomachs uh, convert the cellulose, right?
Yep.
And remember, cows don't get any nutrition from the grass either, right? They're eating the grass to feed the bacteria, and the bacteria convert the cellulose into short chain fatty acids and protein. And so the cows are getting all their protein, short chain fatty acids from that fermentation that goes in them. Now, horses, on the other hand,
Okay.
elephants, things like that, are what are called rear fermenters. And the rear fermenters, they have a gigantic colon, right? I mean, it's half of their GI tract, and they're doing all
Okay.
the fermentation there. And
Hmm.
they have a relatively large stomach. And the best example, if you want to think of something in a more humanoid type of a shape, is the mountain gorilla, right?
Hmm.
Everyone says, "Oh, mountain gorillas are gigantic. They're strong. They're well. The reason they're so big, like any other herbivore, and mountain gorillas live exclusively on plant fibers, right? Is
Hmm.
that they have to eat. Now, mountain gorillas eat 16 to 20 hours a day. They're
Hmm.
just consuming leaves and branches and other stuff to feed the bacteria.
Right,
Okay.
right.
And so they have to have this enormous uh, chest on them to be the barrel shape that protects the enormous GI tract they have because they have to
Hmm.
ferment all this plant material. So
Hmm.
they're so big because the body had to develop that big to allow for all this material to go into it, right? Now you think about your your omnivores. Now, my definition of an omnivore is an animal that gets a significant portion of its nutrition either from proteins and fats or from plant materials. But
Hmm.
what do omnivores really eat? They're eating tubers and berries and stuff like that. They're not eating salads for the most part. So they
Right.
can, because
Yeah.
they're not doing a lot of fermenting either.
Hmm.
Okay, and
Hmm.
your classic fermenters are cows and pigs and chickens, right?
Right, right. They're eating more readily digestible foods, basically.
Right. And they get a full range of stuff in there. Okay.
Hmm.
Then
Hmm.
you have for carnivores, you essentially have two basic types of carnivores I want you to focus in on. One are obligate carnivores. And the biggest example of an obligate carnivore is the house cat almost everybody has nowadays, right?
Hmm.
Anything that's feline, right? Everything from the small little house cat all the way up to the lions and tigers and all that, right? They're obligate carnivores. Their digestive system gets almost no nutrition whatsoever from plant material. They just have no
Hmm. Hmm.
way of doing that, and so they get 100% of everything has to be meat and fat for them to
Hmm.
enjoy, right? Then you have what are called facultative carnivores, and humans fit into this role. And dogs, the wolf kind, wolves, the whole canine group, bears fit into this group very nicely.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
our GI tracts are designed to primarily get nutrition from eating fats. In fact, humans, once again, I go back to the anthropological paleo humans, probably wanted to get um, and I'm going to use calories just because it's a term people are familiar with. It's not a very good scientific term, but it's a term we're
Yeah,
all familiar with.
yeah. I mean, we're going to get into the calories question a bit later on for
Okay,
sure.
so but what I normally point to is that when we look at the anthropological studies, when we look at some of the groups like the Inuit and the Maasai and stuff like that, 75-80% of the calories, so of the volume of food, of your energy, should be in the form of fats. And
Hmm.
that seems to be where humans are set up in that room. The rest being in terms of proteins. Uh, can you get nutrition from tubers and stuff like that? Yes, you can.
Hmm.
Okay, but we're very inefficient at
Hmm.
getting nutrition from such things. But we have
Okay, so
that.
you're saying that people who only have access to meat, like
Hmm.
Inuits and Maasai and let's say ancestral humans, like when they're consuming the fats from animals, that's being broken down into their day-to-day energy usage.
Yes, 100%. So
Yeah.
when the question is, do they have enough to survive winter? And the answer is, well, yeah, because guess what? It's still an energy balance equation. Okay? It's not
Hmm.
calories in, calories out. Well, we'll get to that at some point, but it
Hmm.
is an energy balance equation. You need a certain amount of nutrition to fuel
Hmm.
your body. If
Right.
you eat more than you need, and it doesn't matter whether it's protein or fat, or it could be even carbohydrates, right? When you get more energy than your body needs, it stores it away. So
Hmm.
your hunters would typically, and I base this on studies we've done on Paleolithic finds on how they hunted. Plus, when we go back and we have some relatively recent examples. We have the North American natives, right, who
Hmm.
hunted the bison. We have the
Hmm.
Aboriginals tribes in Australia, for example, where we saw them. We interacted with them in a time when we had good historical records of what they were doing. Um, they would typically hunt in a fashion I would call persistence hunting. I
Hmm.
don't know how most people think about this, but the evidence we have is that what humans are really good at, especially being bipedal, right? Walking on two legs, humans are really good at walking fast for long periods of time, right?
Hmm.
Uh, there's a tribe in Mexico, I can't remember, in the mountains that have these incredibly long runs for hundreds of miles over several days, right? And they just keep
Hmm.
running and running and running,
Right.
and and um,
And interestingly, like they run barefoot, right?
yeah,
They're better runners than 90% of the people who have the latest Nike Air
exactly.
Flies or whatever it
The
is.
only thing they couldn't do is get these guys to understand that this is a race because the Mexican government was actually trying to recruit them for the Olympic team, and they could
Hmm.
never get these guys to culturally get into the fact that, oh, we want you to run 26 miles and win, right? It
Hmm.
it was just not part of their culture normally to
No,
do that.
no.
But these are fantastic runners, and like in Kenya, I mean, why does
Hmm.
Kenya have all the Olympic champions, right?
Right.
Because they run all the time, right? But
Yes.
but they don't necessarily run like a sprint,
Yes.
okay?
It's like endurance. Like
It's
they
endurance,
are. It's endurance, survival. It's like ingrained in
exactly.
the culture. So just to touch back to
Yeah.
the fat being converted to energy. So does the fat get stored and then it's converted to ketones, or like how is that fat
Oh,
that you
good question.
consume?
Let,
Yeah.
let me go back to the persistence hunting thing just for 1 second.
Hmm.
So, what happens is we know that humans are designed for long-term, long-distance running, and being
Hmm.
bipedal helps. The other thing humans have is we're the only animal that can effectively throw a spear,
Hmm.
right? It has to do with our shoulder, how it's developed, how it works. Nothing else can actually pick up a spear and throw it like a human can. Okay?
Hmm.
So humans have this ability to create projectiles. So with the persistence hunters, what they would do is they would for days track, let's say, either the bison herds or the mammoth herds. They didn't have to overtake them. They didn't have to be faster than them. They just had to keep following them.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
what would
Hmm.
happen is that because humans have the ability to sweat much better than
Hmm.
almost any other mammal,
Hmm.
we don't overheat. Where
Right.
mammoths and bison and other animals um, can
Yep.
can run faster on four legs than we ever could for short distances. Over long distances, they get tired, they overheat, they have to stop.
Exactly. Yeah.
Once they stop, spears come out. Right? We don't have to take them down and wrestle them. We use spears. That's what the big brain is for.
Yep.
And we get them. And then we would feast for days,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? On what was taken down. And you would, smoke some of it, and so that way you have food for later on. But
Hmm.
you would hunt them for days, you'd feast for days, then you go back and hunting.
Hmm.
And nowhere in that cycle did you really have to worry too much about
Hmm.
not having enough food to eat because the human
Yeah,
body can last for days without
yeah,
eating.
I guess it's hard to imagine as well, but obviously in those times, I mean, you have to consider how many species we're not even aware of that we've basically
Oh,
hunted.
humans
So
wiped
there would have
out
been
so many.
abundance, yeah.
Yeah,
So like
wiped
there
out
would have
so
been
many.
an abundance of, like we only think of animals as in the jungle and Amazon
Hmm.
or like on farms in rural areas, but yeah, the reality is they're everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. So there's
Yeah.
there's all so when you get down to this idea of what did early humans eat, okay? One, if plants were available, we had the ability
Hmm.
to get nutrition from them, and so certainly they ate them. I mean, just think about bears. A
Hmm.
bear roaming in the woods is going to see a berry tree or berry plant, right? And it's going to
Yeah.
devour that berry plant. It's going to eat all the
Hmm.
berries, right?
Hmm.
Uh, it's not going to let that go away. But does it survive on the berries? Oh, no, no. It gets fish and small game and all kinds of. And if
Hmm.
you're a grizzly, you're getting the salmon in the river and the
Hmm.
hobbit, right? Um,
Yeah.
well, humans are that way too, right? If berries and stuff are available, fruit, we would eat it, obviously, right?
Hmm.
But the majority of what we ate would be what we're designed to eat. Because if you look at the human
Hmm.
GI tract, and this is where when people say, "Well, why did you gear towards this type of a diet that you're telling people to eat?" Is if you look at how the GI tract is designed, right? We have uh, um, after you get past the mouth, right? And by the way, we don't need fangs. Everyone says, "Oh, we should have fangs if we're a carnivore." No, no, no. We have something that other animals don't have. We have the ability to chew, right? So
Mm.
we can cook the meat, and we
Yes,
and we
exactly.
have big
Fire.
brains, right? So
Yes.
so we can take the meat and we can chew it apart and take it down for easy digestion, right? But once you get past the mouth and you get in the stomach, our stomach is incredibly small compared to other animals,
Hmm. Hmm.
and it's highly acidic. The human stomach is
Mm.
the second or the third most acidic stomach on the planet.